Hi everyone, my name is Kelly Stone and I did my cultural immersion project on the Panamanian culture. I had some trouble deciding on which culture I really wanted to do it on, but after thinking about different cultures that I found interesting or that I hadn't learned about, I decided to go with the Panamanian culture. My parents' neighbor is Panamanian, and he's a very down-to-earth, very sweet guy, and I just decided to go with the Panamanian culture for that reason. So I'm going to go over just a few ideas that I had in the beginning, and then I'm going to go over the history of it, and then talk about the book that I read, and the film that I watched, and the event that I actually watched, and things like that. So when I first started the project, I wasn't quite sure which culture I wanted to do it on. I kind of looked at a list of Polish, Swedish, Panamanian, and Chinese. As I said, I went with Panamanian culture. To give you a little history about the Panamanian culture, they were a Spanish colony in Central America and made up of a few different populations. Today, Panama is referred to as the Republic of Panama. Due to Panama being a part of the Spanish colony, the main language changed in the 1950s to Spanish rather than English. As of 2014, the population in Panama was 3.6 billion. As of 2012, the population of Panamanian people, in the United States was 103,300 of the residents born in Panama, and 183,700 of Hispanic Panamanian origin. As of 2013, the United States trade export to Panama was $10.6 billion, and the export was $10.6 billion, and the import was $449 million. Quite a big difference. At the time of the Panama Canal construction, what they called the Canal Zone was put into the U.S. Census from 1920 through 1970, when the U.S. had jurisdiction over Panama, but then was transferred back to Panama in 1977. In the Republic of Panama today, there's 4,105,778 people, and it is projected to be at 4,040,000 people by 2020. The culture is a rich diversity of so many different mixes of races and cultures. As I said, the ethnic groups consist of Spanish, British, Irish, Dutch, French, Germans, Italians, Portuguese, Poles, Russians, Americans, Barbadians, and Jamaicans, and I'm sure more than that. Those are just the ones that happen to be written down. The culture itself, at least the history and the stuff of today that I learned about, was pretty interesting. They seem to be a very laid-back, easygoing culture and really family-oriented and everything like that. So that was kind of interesting to learn. To skip on to the next part of my project, the book that I read is called Dying to Better Themselves, West Indians and the Panama Canal. So this book kind of goes over Panama in general, from before the Panama Canal came about, or before it came about. It talks about the railroad in Panama that they built, and it talks about the French canal that they had. It also talks about the history of the canal coming about, and how that the U.S. wasn't the first people to think that they could build a canal there, and for other people in different countries and everything, it just didn't work out. I believe we took over from the French that tried to build the canal, and we took over that stuff that they had left there. Back to the book, though. The book covers a lot of stuff. It's a little over 300 and some odd pages long, but the section I really wanted to focus on was what the West Indian and Panamanian workers endured during the construction of the Panama Canal. Reading this book was really kind of heartbreaking and kind of caught me off guard a little bit to really learn about what these workers and people went through and how they were treated as indisposable, and it was just kind of sad to think about. They had to deal with such things as sicknesses and diseases. I mean, they died of malnutrition, dehydration, lack of proper clothing and proper like residence and everything like that, and it just was one thing after another, and it seems like they couldn't catch a break. Between that and their wages, it just wasn't a great situation for them. The first thing I really want to talk about is the diseases that they actually had to suffer from. Mosquitoes was a huge problem there. They spread malaria and yellow fever, and yellow fever was raging. And they basically would attack these people who didn't have good immune systems or have great health care, and it would just take them over and kill them instantly. In the book, it goes into a lot more in-depth detail, and I'm going to just go over it very, very quickly, even though it's very interesting to read, and I would recommend this book, if you're really interested to read any information. Let's see, let me go to that one page. The Colonel William C. Gorgas, I believe, if I'm pronouncing it right, he worked hard to create the sanitation brigade, basically killing and doing everything he could to kill the mosquitoes, making sure they drained swamps and rivers and got rid of any open water so that the larvae can survive and that the workers could survive longer, and they were really strict about this. And I thought it was very impressive that this Gorgas was so intent on making sure that everyone was healthy and making sure that the environment was good for both races, the white men and all the West Indian people and everything like that. So it was pretty interesting to see that actually someone took something as seriously as that because they cared about making sure everyone stayed healthy. Another key point that I wanted to point out was kind of interesting. Give me a second, I gotta find it. That the other big problem there was the animals that they had to face, and this was kind of a shocker to me. I mean, if you look, these crocodiles, and they're just huge, it's scary. They had to deal with crocodiles and snakes and spiders and just one thing after another. It seemed like they couldn't catch a break. And it was just saddening to see that. And, this book was a real big eye-opener for me. And I enjoyed it very much, but it was very sad to think that we the U.S., treated people so horribly. And we have it through history, but reading it firsthand knowledge, hearing quotes from different people, from people who were there, from people who wrote it down, everything was just sad to hear. But that was pretty much what I learned about in the book. Basically, the lives that they lived and how harsh it was to live in those conditions, and that it mattered to work hard. The next thing is the film that I watched. It was called Hands of Steel, and it was about the boxer back in the 70s and 80s, Roberto Duran. He actually grew up in Panama as a poor boy, and even though he got into trouble and liked to fight, a trainer took him under his wing, and he basically trained him his whole life and told him that if he kept his life together, he would take care of him and do everything he could to do that. And later on, he got a manager, who was a wealthy man, who took care of him and promoted him and got him all his fights. And then after that, after he had made a name for himself, he hooked up with a trainer and an ex-boxer named Gray Arcel, who took him to his first world championship. And it just follows his life and about how family and love and loyalty and strength and perseverance are all important to him, and because of his life, and making sure that he can change his own life and his children's life, and it really showed through the love that he had for his family. It was also interesting because it showed him growing up on screen and falling in love with his wife, who he still is married to today, and it was just a very interesting movie that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I would recommend it. The Immersion project, the experience was the cultural event that I did. I couldn't actually do anything. They didn't have anything available to go and watch, so I looked up videos about the Carnival celebration, which they also celebrate in Panama, and it was pretty cool. The culture that they make floats, and they have a big party, and they hang out, and this is the weekend before Ash Wednesday, and they just kind of celebrate life and enjoy themselves, and it's very impressive. It's really impressive. So now on to the second, or the third, or I'm sorry, the fourth part of my project. It was the personal interview. This was probably by far the most amazing part of this whole experience for me, because I really got to know my mom's neighbor and realize the kind of person he was and hear more about his family. He came from a family of, let's see, he was one of, I believe, 11 children, and he was the youngest boy. And I just learned about his family and how his mother was his main inspiration and how she loved him and took care of him. And then his grandfather actually stowed away on a boat at 17 to go work on the Panama Canal. And just learning about his history and how his life came about in Panama, and learning how his family was immersed and part of the history of the Panama Canal was amazing. I enjoyed it probably more than anything of this project, and it was really nice getting to know him on a personal level. To me, he's a family man, and to himself, he is all about family and all about love. He loves his wife, he loves his 2 daughters, and he loves his granddaughter more than anything. And it shows, and it definitely shows throughout the culture, that everything that I've read and seen so far. The last thing that I want to talk about is just basically to summarize the whole project. I actually enjoyed this project very much. It was very difficult at first trying to figure out everything, but I enjoyed it very much because it made me learn so much about another culture that I would have never even thought about. Having the chance to actually take the time to look in and see a culture from different aspects, through the carnival events, and talking to someone who had firsthand knowledge, and watching a movie about someone who changed their life around, who was down in the slums and poor and didn't have anything, and doing all these things just to make a life for yourself, and both using that example for the workers at the Panama Canal, working hard to create a name for yourself and to create a life for yourself is so honorable and so respectful. And the culture just really surrounded itself with love and loyalty and perseverance to me, and family by far was the most important thing. So altogether, I really enjoyed this project, and I recommend doing some research of your own, and like I said, reading this book, Dying to Better Themselves, West Indians and the Building of the Panama Canal. I recommend it, and if you're ever interested in reading more about the history, there you go. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your holidays.